Okay, well, I'm really sorry about the technology issues. Please interject if you can't hear me. This is a project that's involved a lot of people from a lot of organisations, and I won't go through the whole list because we've run out of time. But basically, it's the Australian Department of the Environment, Papua New Guinea Department of the Environment, and various biological collections around Australia, and representatives from each one of the herbaria and fauna collections within Australia. It's a work in progress. It's a long-term project that we've been working on, and I should say at the outset that this is a professional view and doesn't really have official policy in it. So it includes the work and ideas of colleagues, the mistakes and of my own, and it has a botanical focus, but it's applicable to museums and other biological collections, and it'll be high level and descriptive and generalised. I've got another glitch. By way of personal background, I do work at the Australian National Botanic Gardens. I'm the Team Leader for Information Management at the Australian National Herbarium, and I spent my youth in the Pacific and 15 years at the Herbarium at the Division of Botany in May, and recently at the Australian National Herbarium in Canberra. This presentation, the context is biodiversity data management and surveys. And the biodiversity and surveys provide data for analysis for environmental research, environmental planning, decision support that lead through the national development, community development and conservation. It's a biodiversity survey of Papua New Guinea, by Papua New Guinea, for Papua New Guinea, and we're looking for assistance from overseas biologists who have an interest in the taxa, interest in the regions, and interest in the biota origins of the area. We have some initial Australian government assistance, and we're looking for further Australian government assistance, and we'll be eventually looking for international assistance. I'll be talking about the historical context and the current context, briefly about Australia's biodiversity collections, PNG's biodiversity collections, the potential for PNG, what's in it for Australia, and a few issues, and then about the data itself that we're talking about. How much is there, how compatible is it, how good is it, where can we get it, how do we store it and manage it, and so on. And finally the cost. And then there'll be a way forward. So by way of historical context in Papua New Guinea, in the early colonial period, most of the specimens were sent back to Europe and stored in European herbaria and museums. After the war, the Australian administration took a leading role, and the specimens still went to Europe, but then they went to Australia and to North America. After the war, there was a change in the direction of where specimens were sent, including more going back to Papua New Guinea. And following self-government independence of the country, the primary repository of the specimens was Papua New Guinea, with duplicates and others going to Australia, North America and Europe. This contrasts with modern biodiversity surveys, which tend to be multidisciplinary, multi-institutional, international collaborative, and focus a lot on data exchange and sharing the maintenance of it. In particular, and you'll hear more from John LaSalle later, the Atlas of Living Australia is a focus for our attention on biodiversity surveys. And in particular, we'll be looking at the Australia's Virtual Herbarium. There's also the online catalogue of Australian museums and other projects such as Identify Life, which provide access to identification tools, the Biodiversity Data Recording System, which provides tools for surveys, and various applications that manage images of habitats and multimedia and so on, and Beth has described some of these activities. The focus for a lot of our biodiversity surveys is aimed at the providing data that can be used by the Global Biodiversity Information Facility and other international projects like Encyclopedia of Life, the Biodiversity Heritage Library and so on. And this is supported by the work of the Taxonomic Databases Working Group, which provide the standards for data that we're going to exchange. And of particular interest to us is the Global Plants Initiative, and you heard Shelley talk about some of the images of type specimens that are being supported by this project. Of particular interest to us is this data contributing to the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, and Beth is coordinator of the Oceania node. At the moment there are 2 participants in the Oceania node, and it would be really nice to have a third in the form of Papua New Guinea and in other countries. This map isn't quite right because Hawaii is also a participant in the Pacific area, and its participation is through the US, which is a GBIT participant. Interestingly enough, although we are the smallest region in terms of participants, we provide 1/3 of the data, which is quite significant. So we'd like to somehow mobilise the data from Papua New Guinea so we can increase this proportion. Australia's biodiversity collections, which we hope to contribute data to Papua New Guinea, there are 3 main types. There's the national collections, which have a strong international focus and do hold significant Papua New Guinea collections. There are state and territory collections, which generally have a regional focus. Some of them historically have significant numbers of PNG collections, and the university collections, which tend to have a teaching and regional focus. And you can see here a map of where they're distributed, mainly on the east coast of Australia, but there's a lot of them. This map includes all of the biological collections that contribute to the Atlas of Living Australia. And as part of the work on the Australian biota, coincidentally, some Papua New Guinea specimens have been captured by the Atlas, and we did this survey, and there's something like 50,000 of them that were caught essentially by accident. So we have representatives of the biota of Papua New Guinea, 50,000 of them that are already in the Atlas without even trying. Papua New Guinea's botanical collections, most of them are duplicated in Australian herbaria and some other overseas herbaria, which raises the potential for data repatriation. We had a first go at this. Barry Con in particular at the Botanic Gardens in Sydney established PNG Plants Database, which is a compilation from 4 of the major Australian herbaria, and he then harvested data from elsewhere, and was able to serve this from the herbarium in New South Wales. And I've just got some quick screen grabs here of the website. It's at pngplants.org, and it has a simple query into the database, which I won't go through, which brings you back basic information of the specimens, sometimes with images where they have been scanned. The PNG biodiversity collections, on the other hand, aren't as well organised or linked as the Australian ones. The zoological collections are not duplicated for all sorts of obvious reasons, but there is still the potential for data repatriation that can be used for various conservation purposes. The potential for Papua New Guinea in this data repatriation exercise is that we end up with more people studying Papua New Guinea specimens. We have more recent research and taxonomy. We have more accurate and up-to-date data, and more repatriated data that can be made available for research, planning, management, and importantly as seed data for Papua New Guinea's own institutional databases. What's in it for Australia is a regional focus for biodiversity search, which includes national and international collaboration. We'll have attention to significant regional collections in terms of curation, identification, specimen management, and so on. And part of the proposal that we're considering will have elements of regional development and capacity building, including training of Papua New Guineans in country and in Australia. Australia has a continuing interest in the flora of the region, and here is a list of 20 or so people who are still working on the flora of Papua New Guinea. There are a number of issues in the providing access to data for Papua New Guinea from Australia. And one of them is the issue of open access. Open access to data is a given, almost a given in Australia. We've all embraced the free sharing of data between institutions, and this tendency is increasing globally. But there is no general acceptance of this principle in Papua New Guinea yet. And so there are certain local sensitivities that need to be addressed, and this is very important. In particular, there will be sensitive data of rare and endangered species, commercial in confidence occurrence of biodiversity, and of course traditional concerns of regions and of the plants and animals that grow there. So we'll have to establish models for data licensing and data use agreements, and these are by no means clear in Papua New Guinea, and in terms of sharing Papua New Guinea data overseas, we'll have to come to grips with that. The Creative Commons licenses is the model that we tend to be converging on in Australia, but there's no general acceptance of that in Papua New Guinea yet, so we're going to have to work our way through that. The data itself, basically the data that we're looking at comes from specimens. We're focusing on specimen data because the taxonomy can be checked. Unfortunately, it tends to be randomly collected, and it's presence-only data, which creates problems for people who want to do certain statistical analysis. There are a few points of variable precision, and it's relatively expensive to collect. Contrasting this with surveys, which is another approach for biodiversity data in Papua New Guinea, that often don't have vouchers. The taxonomy is doubtful and can't be checked. And the survey design is structured, which is a good thing, and there are many data points, and it's relatively cheap to collect compared to specimen data. There's other data that we have to manage and share with Papua New Guinea, and Shelley and Beth went through some of this in terms of the nomenclatural and taxonomic data. National species lists are going to be very important as a foundation for this survey work. Species profiles, descriptive data, images, illustrations, multimedia, literature, and so on. All of these can be provided by overseas countries to Papua New Guinea with very little cost to the people providing it. What I'm reporting here is a summary of a survey sponsored by the Australia's Virtual Herbarium Trust and the Council of Heads of Australian Herbaria that was basically doing a census of how many PNG plant specimens there were in Australia, where are they, how well are they identified, how well are they geolocated, how many have been databased, how many have not been databased, and basically an estimate of what it would cost to curate and database the remainder. Here is a brief summary of the report so far, and the important thing to note is the I don't know whether you can see the arrow. The number at the bottom of 180,000 more or less Papua New Guinea specimens that have already been databased in Australian herbaria, which is a significant number. Oops. The next slide is the number of undatabased specimens in Australian herbaria, and it's roughly a 250,000, 254,000. So that's 1.5 times as much again. So when you add those two together, Australia has 434,000 Papua New Guinea plant specimens that can be databased and the data repatriated to Papua New Guinea. This is roughly almost twice the size of the Papua New Guinea herbarium. So this data, once mobilised, would be a very good start to a Papua New Guinea botanical inventory database. So how compatible is the data? It's on the whole, it's pretty good. Most herbaria these days follow the standards of the Taxonomic Databases Working Group. It has international acceptance and uses use these standards wherever they can. And most biodiversity databases these days are TADWI compliant in one form or another. And there are well-established protocols for data exchange that can be used for complex to quite simple data. Conceptually, the data is very simple. It's who collected it, what do they collect, where do they collect it, when do they collect it, and often how and why it was collected. And this produces useful dots on maps types of information, which we've already seen some of. This shows some, and John Lassalle will no doubt talk about it in more detail when he talks about the functionality of the atlas. We have some issues. If the wrong name is applied to the specimen, the data is useless. If it's the wrong place, it's useless data. So we have to address that. We have particular issues in Papua New Guinea with the state of knowledge of the identification. Our knowledge of the groups in many cases is not as good as, say, for countries like Australia or New Zealand. We don't have available revisions and keys. The groups just haven't been treated. The scopes of the revisions may not cover all of Papua New Guinea. Some of the revisions may be very old and no longer relevant. The quality of the revisions may be flaky. And the identifiers who come to apply these revisions will not have the familiarity or skill with Papua New Guinea plants as they would have with, say, Australian plants. And some groups in PNG are just inherently complex. So all of these things added together means that identifying Papua New Guinea specimens for databasing is going to be a lot more complicated than doing them, say, for Australia. And similarly with geolocation, many of the specimens are old. The available technology when they were collected to record the geolocation wasn't sophisticated. The accuracy of locations is sometimes very poor. Oftentimes the precision of the locations is poor. And the people who are going to retrofit the geocodes for the specimens won't have the familiarity of the Papua New Guinea places that Papua New Guinea would have. And there's the issue of the stability of the place names in Papua New Guinea, because oftentimes villages move from one side of the valley to another, to one side of the river to another. And this creates problems when you're trying to deal with historical specimens. And also we have the issue of the availability of maps, gazetteers, and satellite imagery that is not as good as it is in Australia. But there is some good news. Many of the specimens are collected at the same locality, which means we can piggyback on them and reuse previously calculated geocodes, and this will improve our data capture rates. And some databases, batches of specimens have not been fully incorporated yet and can be databased as a block. And on the positive side, all data is good for something. So an unidentified specimen can always be, can often be re-identified. A misidentified specimen can be corrected. And we have to deal with the fitness of purpose of specimens. So even some specimens who are very poorly located might be useful for recording the occurrence of a taxon in the province, or even just the occurrence of the taxon in the country. So it's always useful at some scale. You have this hierarchy of localities that different types of data may be useful. And GBIF and the ALA have data use statements which are very good for this purpose. So how can we get this data? The background activity that we're looking at is we talk about the ratchet principle, where once having done a particular group of plants, you never go backwards. So all new collections coming into the organisations would be databased and documented. All specimens going and coming on loans and exchange, routine identifications and identifications as part of strategic research projects. All of these things will contribute to the increasing amount of information available for Papua New Guinea. And we're hoping to attract funding for new projects. We've got a little bit of money from the Heritage Division of our Environment Department, and we're expecting some money from AusAid, and hopefully we'll be able to attract funding from external agencies to database biological specimens from Papua New Guinea with the view to repatriate the data once it has been databased and checked. So in terms of the mechanics of managing this, a couple of issues that we have to deal with is that the survey of Papua New Guinea tends to be regionally based in terms of surveys of particular areas of geography. And but unfortunately, herbarium museums are arranged in taxonomic order, so it's very difficult to pull out all of the specimens from one particular place, database those. So we're talking to them about trying to focus the activity on groups of taxa that are going to be, or anticipated to be, common in a certain area, and or doing all of a particular block of specimens within the shelf, drawer, or cupboard, and again applying the ratchet principle. So we'll have these little management units of. You there? Hello. Oh, I'll keep going. We have the issue of where to keep the data once it has been collected and made available for Papua New Guinea. In terms of management, we see that the logical place to keep the data and look after it is in the custodial institution, those institutions that have responsibility for the specimens. In Papua New Guinea, there are institutional capacity issues as far as managing databases go, and Beth was speaking earlier about the use of the internet, which is really good in countries where it's well established, but in Papua New Guinea it's unreliable and it is very expensive. So we're looking at other ways to deal with the data, and hopefully we'll have discussions with the Atlas of Living Australia as how best to do that. The issues of cost, bandwidth, reliability and trust, if you're going to host the database overseas, are very important. And similarly, if the decision is made to host it in the cloud, issues of cost, trust, access, bandwidth and reliability come into play again. The other aspect of the data is the sustainability. Who is going to look after it? Where can they look after it? 2 minutes left. Sorry. Okay, I just got your message, Beth. Are we there or? In terms of sorry, just got out of step. We need to discuss how the data is going to be updated, and particularly we want an escape route for the data so that we can see we can have a place for the data if the project should close down, and this will again require standards and compatibility. The model for consideration that we really want to promote is the production of a PNG portal of the ALA, mirrored in Papua New Guinea if at all possible, but we don't know who that would be hosted or managed by, and this data could see the Papua New Guinea collections, and so I think I'm out of time. Is that right? I'll stop there, Beth. Hello. Hello. Well, I think I've lost it. I think I've been talking to myself. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Hello. Yep. Hello. Hello. Hello.
Okay.
All right.
Can you hear me now, Jim?
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, yep, I can hear you now.
Yes, okay, great. Thank you very much.
So, I don't know if anything happened there or not. So, hello?
Through, I don't think any questions came through online. So to folks who are listening online, if you have any questions for Jim, do send them through on the chat box, and what we'll do is we'll get Jim to respond to them at the end.
Oh, hold on.
Oh, hang on a minute.
Could Jim show the next slides or answer the question, how much will it cost?
Oh. What, can you still hear me? This is the $64,000 question. We really don't know, and the project is to ground truth the data capture on a small number of collections first, to see how much more expensive it is to database specimens from Papua New Guinea than it is to do it for Australia, for argument's sake. So at the moment, everyone's saying it's going to be a lot more expensive, but we don't know how big a lot is. So a little pilot project has been funded by the Department of the Environment to just to ground truth this. So we really can't tell you. It's going to be a lot. In the first estimate, it was many millions of dollars, but we don't have many millions of dollars. So we're going to ground truth it so we can go back to the potential funders and say, well, we've done a pilot project. We've scoped out the scale of the task, and a realistic figure is X. So that's that's as far as we got.
Okay, thanks, Jim. There was one other question here from Lee Belbin, and he asked, any idea of a likely hosting organisation in PNG? I'm not sure exactly which one that referred to.
Yeah, the most likely hosting organisation is the Department of Environment and Conservation, but they might decide to outsource that to some local agency with really good computing capacity. But that's the challenge at the moment, is to try and find out where that is. So at the moment, I can think really comfortably about the atlas of having suitable capacity to manage the data and deliver it to Papua New Guinea, but then I have concerns about the bandwidth, the reliability of the internet up there, and what happens when it gets there. So that's the discussions we're having at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully that answered Lee's question. Jim, thanks very much for sticking in there and presenting. We've recorded that, so we'll be able to get that online for anyone who may have missed it. One more question has just come through. Matt here from New Zealand. Does Australia house most of PNG's plant specimen duplicates?
I'm going to say yes, but we really haven't done the work yet. I think there are more duplicates of Papua New Guinea specimens in Australia than any other country. But having said that, there are some very significant collections in Europe and North America from various expeditions pre-war and immediately post-war. So places like Leiden, Kew, Smithsonian, Arnold Arboretum, etc., have very large collections of Papua New Guinea specimens. A lot of those are duplicated in Australia. All of them should be duplicated in Papua New Guinea. So it's managing the data that we can get from all these duplicates that is both a challenge and an opportunity at the moment, because there's an awful lot out there that could be a great advantage to Papua New Guinea.